Hello and welcome to Leviathan News. Today is September 22nd, and we have the Layer N team here to talk about hyperscaling. We got Pat and David, and then Dima was here, but he dropped off, but he'll be back in a second. So welcome.
Back.
Hey, excited to be here.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, if you're here.
And look, Dima just joined back as well too. Welcome back, Dima. Okay, we're having
Hey guys.
Oh, there we go. It's great to have you all. I know that the big news that we reported on in our timeline, I believe it's just a couple of days ago, that you guys had wrapped up a $5 million funding round to get your L2 off the ground. So maybe you can go through that kind of the end of the funding, or like that whole process, and how that felt to get everything wrapped up.
Yeah, I can speak quickly to that. So we made the announcement maybe a week ago. So we're super stoked and excited to be working closely with really some of the best investors across the space, both on the traditional finance side as well as on the more DeFi native side. And so we're working with folks like Founders Fund, Joey Krug, Tekken from DAO5, the Salt team, which is a bridge into the traditional finance world, as well as the Kraken Ventures and Marana teams, and of course we also have the support of GSR and Amber and a bunch of incredible angels, and I think really what brought together is just this sort of common vision for the excitement that we can build something better for on-chain financial systems, both in this current sort of DeFi world, but also looking into the future, like bringing the entire sort of global digital financial system on-chain. And so, we closed that round, announced it a week ago, and right now we're kind of heads down, developing and working towards a testnet and a launch soon.
So what are you guys going to be using the funds for? Is that really to grow the team, or what do you have in store for the next like 6 to 12 months?
So the main thing is definitely costs around scaling up the team and some other sort of operational expenses. So we've been in the process of hiring some really incredible people. I mean, Pat joined the team not too long ago, and she's hands down one of the most insane people to work with. And she's been really sort of helping us lead a lot of our growth verticals. And then, like over the next few months, we're also in the process of hiring. And so we also have like a careers page up and running. And so if anyone is out there looking for a role or looking to build with us, like, please do reach out to us as well.
So one of our fellow squids here at Leviathan, Eason, has done a great technical overview of Layer N. I don't know if you guys have seen what he wrote, but we've been reading over it the past few days, and it kind of goes into detail about what you guys are trying to build. And we'll link this in the show notes because it's a great write-up. Let me just pull this up.
Don't do that. Don't do that. It's only for his key holders. On
okay. I'm sorry. You need to go buy his friend tag. But anyways, I'll just use the high-level show notes then. Right. So like Layer N he says is a roll-up network on Ethereum focusing on high performance inter-roll-up communication and liquidity and purpose-specific roll-ups. So maybe you guys can like break down what is there and what's happening with Layer N.
Yeah. I mean, like throughout like spending time in crypto, we just saw like the massive gap between Web3 space and traditional finance, right? And the gap is like massive, right? Like you to look at Binance does 700,000 transactions a second. Like Solana does 400. L2s do like less than 100 and less than 50 most of the time. Right. So with this like gap in mind, only on throughput side, we realized that like there's a lot of room to improve. We also saw a lot of very novel technology being developed in ZK space, in data availability space, back in like last year in 2022 and realized there's a massive opportunity to actually stop thinking of blockchain as something that's slow, expensive, inefficient, but really bring to the world like the vision where something like literally Nasdaq or Binance can work on chain, right? And that's really the vision for Layer N, to scale throughput not just by 10x or 100x, but by 1000x, right? Enabling all kinds of applications on chain. And we also care a lot about the crypto native developers, crypto native applications, and what kind of advantages they provide just beyond like permissionlessness and decentralization. And it's really composability. So besides like just scaling the throughput, latency, etc., on Layer N, we also build everything in a very composable way. So what the end vision for Layer N is like independent rollups who are all sharing a sequencer and communicating with each other. So you can see a rollup for exchanges integrated with like a smart contract rollup where all the people can build together and not only achieve the same performance as like centralized applications, but also provide extra guarantees on permissionlessness and also being able to compose with the rest of the ecosystem.
Can you get into that a bit more? So you're going to have multiple rollups that that share sequencer. And then I know you didn't mention this, but they're going to be pulling the data availability from EigenLayer. So maybe you can talk about the performance of that and why you went this route.
Yeah. I mean, back when we were thinking about these problems, the biggest bottleneck was always like Ethereum data availability, right? It's like very, very little to go around, right? And especially you see a lot of rollups launching, realizing that it's becoming impossible to launch. You have like a couple of alternatives. You can use like other layer ones for data availability or using other solutions which are being developed. But the problem there has been always Ethereum alignment and how can we bring the most security, right? And talking to Shriram, like we essentially realized that, oh, there is like this perfect middle ground where we can get best of both worlds, where we can get a really a lot of like data availability space, enabling applications which can have thousands of transactions a second, and also can scale horizontally with more validators, while also have Ethereum alignment, because once like EigenDA launches, they will use Ethereum restakers to really secure the network, and that way like we can rely on Ethereum for security while still having the bandwidth like much higher than anything that exists today.
Can you talk about the what is data availability a bit more for people that may not know?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, data availability is around the idea is like, okay, like all these rollups are right now posting data to Ethereum to essentially prove this is the transactions that we executed, and this will enables like rollups to operate the way they are. That applies to Arbitrum or Optimism, right? The problem there is that like as transactions scale, like there's a lot of data to be posted, and it's pretty expensive to do so in Ethereum. So what data availability layers do is they essentially store your data temporarily in a network with like a bunch of nodes like who all share parts of this data. And that network essentially allows you to scale the throughput beyond Ethereum by leveraging a completely different approach to scaling, right? Those data availability networks, they don't run smart contracts. They don't like have assets stored on them. What they do is they just store data temporarily and grow actually their throughput by adding more nodes to the network.
Yeah, so there's I know data availability has been like one of the hot topics this year. You have EigenLayer coming, Celestia as well too. How did you guys like settle on using EigenLayer? I know you mentioned that it's Ethereum aligned, but what about some of the other solutions? Like why did you think EigenLayer was the right choice?
Yeah, I mean, a huge factor was that we saw very early, like when EigenDA was like just to conceptualize, like and talk to their team, realized a lot of technical advantages, and they're really sold in the fact that they're using Ethereum for security, and it felt like really right choice, like at that time to start building around all of our tech stack around that. Instead of like other solutions, they're currently like Celestia, Espresso, built like by also like really strong teams. But in our view, it made sense like to work with like EigenLayer because like we know that like they're behind the EigenLayer itself, so they can get the most Ethereum as well to secure that network, and they're probably going to be one of the earliest ones to go on mainnet, and just essentially like seeing like how like the tech itself, it like made a pretty compelling case for our team like to use them.
And like, where do you guys think you're going to fit in? You know, there's a lot of other there's actually a bunch of competition in the L2 space right now with Polygon, and there's ZK EVMs. Optimism is working towards ZK as well too. Arbitrum, you know, and then there's a bunch of other competitors as well too. So how do you guys plan to take on the incumbents, and where do you think that Layer N is going to fit in?
Yeah, I like to think of us as almost complementary to sort of the rest of the ecosystem. Like, there really isn't any other L1 or L2 that's really focused on DeFi and financial applications as much as we are. And a lot of the sort of roll-up infrastructure solution that we're building is specifically geared towards those applications, right? And so, but to sort of take that further, like, you know, the background of our team actually comes from a background of building on-chain financial applications in the past. And so we've all came from that background. And I think there's very few teams in the space who actually deeply understand the process of building these on-chain protocols as much as we do. And so a big part of sort of what we're focusing on is also just having that superior, like, you know, customer service in a sense, right? Like, we really understand sort of what it's like talking to market makers and what's like building DeFi protocols, and we really want to be that bridge in between it to build the best infrastructure for that specific use case. Oh, Sam, I think you're muted.
Yeah, can you go more into this idea of infrastructure? You talked about that you guys have the background for it. Like, what are some of the current issues with their L2 infrastructure, and like what exactly, when you talk about, you know, you have this background, like what is this really going to assist in helping build for Layer 0?
Yeah, I mean, I can start with just talking about sort of the landscape of existing infrastructures, right? Like, one of our flagship products is Nord, which is an exchange-specific rollup. What we've done there is actually built a VM that's entirely in Rust and specifically for the order book. So kind of like an order book VM, if you will. And really the idea there is just like, you know, you kind of have this spectrum of existing sort of on-chain exchanges. You either have the ones that are built fully on top of like an L1 or an L2, which that inherit like great composability. You know, think of things like GMX, where you can have smart contracts and ecosystems built around them, but you suffer from high compute cost, low performance in terms of throughput and latency, and hard to sort of bring very sort of deep spread liquidity to fully on-chain exchanges like those. And then on the other spectrum, you know, you have your DYDXs and off-chain order books. Now those have the closest thing to like a centralized exchange, like user experience when it comes to performance and latency, but they suffer from the lack of composability, right? So like in DYDX's current model on StartGate, it's a fully isolated rollup, meaning I, as a smart contract developer, can't build smart contracts that compose with DYDX, right? And so you kind of have generally protocols that are on both ends of the spectrum. And really the idea with Nord and the Layer N network is, okay, like we can take the performance that you would expect from a centralized exchange, because we have this dedicated rollup instance that has a dedicated Rust-based order book VM, but we can also add on to that full composability with a smart contract EVM layer through the inter-rollup communication protocol, which is really like the shared sequencer in the Layer N network, right? And so you really, at that point, are able to achieve this vision, which is like, okay, we can take Binance or Coinbase or any centralized exchange, put it fully on chain, right? And then add on to that full composability with permissionless smart contracts, right? Which is really like when you're able to get to a point where you like achieve performance parity with like centralized systems, that's when you can be like, okay, like, and on top of that, we have this world of of composable smart contract that people can now innovate on top of, and now you can finally say, okay, this is like a better system compared to like centralized exchanges or centralized entities or anything that's not built on chain, right?
Yeah. So DYDX is moving to Cosmosm environment here in probably a couple of months with the release of V4, but unfortunately, DYDX is not going to allow any other Cosmos chains to actually interact with their new chain. So, like you said, it's not going to have any composability, won't have any smart contract access, probably for the next like 12 to 18 months while they're testing this out. So, can you get into that more? Like what does that mean when you talk about composability? Like, am I going to be able to like tokenize my positions or strategies, or like what does it actually mean for builders?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the best part of crypto has been this idea of like sandbox, right? Like you have people launching something and then a ton of people like building on top of it. They're tokenizing positions, like you said, and it's like totally permissionless, right? Just seeing Frentech launch, and there's like now a dozen protocols coming out every week, like who are doing something on top of it, reusing this idea, like re-implementing, experimenting, and that's how we see it. We don't want to create some permissioned sandbox where you can do only X, Y, Z. The idea is like, let's put those protocols on chain, like let's give them the compute they need, the throughput they need, and then someone can do whatever they want. They can tokenize position, like you mentioned. They can write a smart contract which takes like creates a position on one exchange and then puts the exchange in a position on another exchange, and it's all cross collateralized, right? The world is like completely open for developers, and the best part, it's like going to be incredibly cheap to compose with everything, and it's going to be instantaneous. So we really see with Layer N unlocking dozens or like maybe hundreds even more new applications which weren't possible before, right? We envision like a ton of market making protocols to be built on top of Layer N who can play around with a lot more sophisticated models other than AMM and provide liquidity across multitude of exchanges. We can see better iterations of like structured products who leverage better exchange frameworks to market make like better derivatives and provide better yield to users. And really it's just like the beginning, and we are having like a ton of interesting discussions with different protocols around what they can do. And we are like no longer thinking about like the gas limitations, but we're like more thinking about like, hey, here's an idea, like let's do it. And what like you're no longer constrained about all the like bounds of like blockchain today.
I was just looking at the chat to see if there's any questions, and Pat, you got a fan club.
Yeah, I saw the chat. Oh man, it's popping right now.
So we just wrapped up Token 2049. Were you guys there for that?
Yep. Also, I was over there.
So it looks like there's the pivot, or at least narrative, is shifting towards like Asian market over the next few years, with a lot of what the US is doing, and also Europe looks to be driving a lot of this development into the East. So when you guys are talking with partners, how do you think that's your primary focus will be to expand in Asian markets?
I think like we would be focusing on both markets, but we won't place like what the West over Asia and just completely ignoring the market and like what's going on over here. I think like in general, a lot of the projects, primarily because of the geographical locations and also because of language barriers, they've been like previously overlooking like the market, what's going on over here. And I think like during the past few months, people have realized that Asia is a really huge market and they should be capturing what's the trends here and also the retail market especially. So I think we can see that like trend shifting from like the amount of people that flew all the way over to attend KBW, Korean Blockchain Week, and also Token 49 in Singapore. It's not like the people like actually going to permissionless, for example. So I can see that all of the funds that are coming over to Asia, and also all the projects are looking forward to establish the roots over in Asia and expand over here.
Yeah.
And yeah, for us, like for our strategies, it's like we're definitely going to be like, have our deep roots over in Asia, while at the same time, not really like prioritizing one market over the other, but we want to be like really like a kind of like a global project and like have our global communities.
Yeah. Well, you guys are building NordX, which is an institutional layer or an institutional roll-up for like I said, institutions. Have you guys seen any interest in demand for that? I mean, there must be. You mentioned some of the market makers who were a part of the round, so they must be interested in building a roll for that.
Yeah, there's not a ton of specific partnerships that I can share at the moment, just because a lot of things are happening behind the scenes. But I can say that there are some really exciting things in the works, particularly on the institutional front. And what we're seeing is like, yeah, there is a ton of interest across institutions to move on chain. And really kind of layer and vision is eventually in the medium to longer term is also bridging that, right? Like we have the DeFi world, we have the institutional world, we have the TradFi world. Like how can we bring everything eventually on chain, and how can we make it a seamless experience for developers to tap into that institutional liquidity as well, right? And so hopefully that's like a good sort of appetizer for what's to come. But yes, we're seeing a lot of interest, and we're really excited for sort of the synergies that we foresee happening between the DeFi world and that institutional world.
So what was it like actually fundraising in this environment? Were VCs like notably hostile to crypto, saying like, are you going to pivot to AI or whatever the latest is, or like were they pretty on board with crypto? What's the mood?
Yeah, I mean, when we started raising, definitely felt like that, like, oh, it's gonna be terrible, right? Like you're not only building in crypto, you're also building in DeFi, right? But I think like coming into the raise, like we had a pretty clear vision and good understanding of the market. And when we came to the space, like we were not repeating the same pitch that VCs heard like multiple times, right? And so actually fundraising didn't even take too much time on our end. We got oversubscribed pretty quickly. But I think like the key was really about like this vision of like, how can we fix existing problems? Because clearly DeFi has shown promise, but there are also like a ton of issues around its scaling, right? And we pitched really the idea and like how we're building the product, the vision, that it's like all about how can we solve existing problems to take us like from where we are now to where we see the space evolving. How can we achieve like a much larger scale and stop playing with this like AMMs and just like sees a bigger picture? And that's like very few teams like seem to have addressed like in before. And we hope like to bring a new product and platform for teams like to essentially scale DeFi to where everyone was like hoping it to see it grow in 2021, 2020.
Yeah, and in the wake of FTX, I mean, there's still a deep need for like strong on-chain trading, which really hasn't really been filled since then. I mean, DYDX is a good start, but obviously there's a lot more design surface area that can be played out with projects like Layering coming.
Yeah, I think particularly like the FTX event was definitely sort of a wake up moment for us, and also a very sort of empowering like validation moment, right? Because like that's when you realize the sense of having an actual like trustless system that can really reduce like that counterparty risk that unfortunately a lot of people suffered through, not only with FTX but also with 2008 and other historical incidents, right? And so really kind of like the larger vision here is not only how can we fix this for DeFi, but also like how do we generally make the global digital financial system more resilient, and that starts with small steps in terms of just fixing scaling and making sure that current applications can run on chain, but the longer future is also essentially making sure that we're building towards that future and not just towards like a more shorter term vision, right?
Yeah. So I wanted to ask about the shared sequencer, right? The kind of way that everything's been rolled out. You've seen Optimism obviously launch their L2. Base launches their own sequencer. It doesn't seem like anybody's had like the idea of doing shared sequencers yet, or has pushed any that technology out yet. Like, is there economic benefits for the person running the sequencer that they wouldn't want to run this shared sequencer? That like, oh hey, Base can add on another. They must be making what, like $6-7 million a month just in sequencer fees, which goes into their balance sheet at the end of the year. Like what do you think the impetus for companies to come in and use your shared sequencer will be versus launching?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of economics like that's been internally discussed with teams, right? Can't share a lot of details on that end. But the biggest benefit is like right now, like there are a ton of concept about like how this connected reality will work with like all the rollups kind of thinking around the thesis, like this rollups need to work together, need to be connected, a lot of experimentation happening in L3 space. But we really propose like a ready framework of how everything works together, which is like we are going to be the first ones to have that live on mainnet. And that value prop like already clear for teams because they're all like kind of building towards that. But we're going to be the first one with the clearest like architecture. We are not dealing with like a multi-year tech debt of implementing a shared sequencer from scratch, right? We are doing it like right now with like every rollup is built with an idea, okay, how does this will work with everything else in this ecosystem? So right now, when we approach teams, we tell them like, this is already ready. Like you're just like need to commit to building here and you'll have access to all of the other protocols in the space. And now like, let's think about like how your protocol fits in this bigger picture. Like, let's think about like how this can all interact. Whereas like when it comes like to other alternative solutions, it's like harder to imagine like how this will like work exactly because like there's no clarity on like how this mechanism will work. It's just like right now discussion for most of them.
Oh, so the shared sequencer, have you guys already coded this out? Like, is this in testing yet?
So currently, yes, we are testing it out like with some of our internal solutions, like the internal communication. It will probably come out a bit after our like initial mainnet with the first exchange rollups, but the backbone is there.
Okay. And then the other part that I wanted to ask about was, but like decentralizing the sequencer, right? We've heard a lot of talk about this, and we've seen some of the other teams out there like actually start to work on proposed solutions. But like, what does it actually mean to decentralize the sequencer? Because I think it's a bit more complicated than just, what we would normally think of just, hey, let's run an auction system or make the code open source and let anyone spin up a sequencer.
Yeah, I think like there are a few topics there, right? Like we don't want to implement decentralized sequencers at the expense of like scaling Ethereum essentially, right? One of the reasons like why rollups are great because they're running a centralized sequencer, right? But we are obviously experimenting with a lot of internal solutions and on our roadmap thinking a lot about like how it will play out, like how it will work in practice. There's a lot of research also being done. So we are definitely thinking a lot about it, but at the moment our first focus is like, okay, how can we make like, let's say, fraud proofs work before anyone else does, right? For example, there are no fraud proofs on Optimism, and there's like only permissioned fraud proofs in Arbitrum, and it's a huge flow in the security, right? Like that, I use an optimistic rollup, and someone can take my money without like me being able to contest it or protest or like escape the rollup space in general. So with like all of this aspects, like to us, it's like most important to guarantee first like security, ability to maintain the uptime of the sequencer, like think about the problem, what if like sequencers goes down, and then the next stage is really decentralizing it and bringing to life the vision of like, okay, every component here will be decentralized.
Right. So we'd start with the fraud proofs, and then you'd start to work with the other parts of your stack, and then eventually get to the sequencers at the end.
Yeah.
And maybe you can talk about those fraud proofs for a bit. Like what exactly is happening there? Is anybody else using them at the moment? I mean, you said that Arbitrum is using a permission fraud proof, but what are you guys planning?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
on the fraud proof.
So go ahead.
Sure. Sorry. So on a fraud-proof side, how we're approaching it differently from, let's say, Arbitrum and previous Optimism versions is that we're using zero-knowledge fraud proofs, meaning that if something goes wrong, someone can take all of the data that's been processed through the sequencer, generate a proof of what the state should be like, and submit this as a proof on Ethereum. Hey, like the state submitted by the sequencer is wrong. Here's a proof. That makes it easier on censorship resistance because let's say we take Arbitrum fraud proof design where it's a game, right? I say that like, okay, let's find a place where sequencer went wrong. And you go back and forth on chain, like pinpointing exactly the transaction, exactly the instruction where a sequencer disagrees with someone who's submitting fraud proof. And because you want to provide the best security guarantees, you're like, okay, this back and forth game can take like a few days, right? Because someone can be spamming Ethereum and censoring you. So because of that, you have a 7-day withdrawal period. Whereas like on layer N, like it's just a single transaction. I just need to generate a proof and submit it. So we can operate with a shorter time frame. And the best part as well is that if you're making sure that everyone can generate a fraud proof, you don't need to have like a massive AWS machine to generate a fraud proof, right? We're literally running our tasks like on a 16 gigabyte laptop, right? So anyone can monitor the chain and in a true permissionless manner, like be able like to detect fraud and submit a fraud proof to prevent the system from collapsing. And so it's not like limited to only people who can afford like a large AWS machine.
Right. So I'm guessing you would need some sort of like bond system so that someone has capital at risk for those fraud proofs, right?
Yes. Essentially, that can involve like bond system or some other economic design that we're discussing, and it can also like initially operate in trust, since like anyone can submit. But idea is like to have like a bond system and some governance process behind it.
So zooming out, like, what do you think the kind of state of various like roll-ups is going to look like over the next like 1 to 3 years? Obviously, it's tough to predict the future in crypto, but like it seems like you're making a bet that there's just going to be a lot more roll-ups. Is that fair to say?
Ideally, every roll-up in 1 to 3 years is part of layer N. That's like the end vision. But we feel like eventually every roll-up will start to converging to this design of like a shared network. The question is like how long it will take, how will they approach it, how will they do its execution, how will they deal with the technical debt. But overall, I think over the next few years, we see a lot of scaling issues disappear. And a lot of focus will move into like application space. Like now I can do whatever on blockchain. Now like the focus would be around like, okay, now what are we doing, right? And we want to be positioned the best, like to actually support those teams, like who will be launching those applications. And the competition in the future will be around, okay, who will have the best ecosystem of developers, builders, and users, and those like networks will thrive the most. So yeah, we'll probably see a couple of large roll-up networks in a couple of years, with hopefully a lot more focus like on applications on top of them.
Right, so putting on your opinion hat, what do you think, maybe like slightly even disconnected from your positions here at Layer N, just like with a broader view, like what do you think is going to happen to those that don't choose to roll up onto Ethereum? Like, do you think that the avalanches of the world, the phantoms, are going to like survive independently, or are they all going to bend the knee?
Yeah, I think like there are a lot of like layer ones like with amazing teams that you can definitely see growing, but we feel like over next year, amount of things that like layer one can do to compete with Ethereum will decrease significantly, right? It will be much harder to build layer one with higher throughputs than layer two on Ethereum. And building layer two on another layer one is strictly worse because you have like worse security guarantees, and it kind of ruins the idea of layer twos. So hopefully we'll see some of those like layer ones like still exist and maybe take development into a different direction and experiment a bit more. Maybe there's like a lot of more research is missing. I think a lot of Ethereum research came out actually from Cosmos, right? A lot of things that were experimented there, they became useful outside of like that blockchain space. There's always a room for like more innovation, but to us it feels like Ethereum will continue to consolidate its position as like number one layer one, and it will be harder and harder to launch a new layer one that will like sustain its growth and be able like to compete with Ethereum, because like the value prop will like significantly decrease.
What's your thoughts on the relative centralization of all these layer twos? Like, do you think they're eventually going to move to be more decentralized as kind of pressures build on them? Or do you think that they are going to kind of stay more like centralized so that they can be nimble and quick?
I mean, I think like the importance around the topic of centralization is making sure that the environment is fault tolerant, and also that even if it is, you know, a centralized entity running the rollup, that there is like essentially an exit hatch or a way for, you know, users to get out of it if, you know, AWS shuts down, or let's say the sequencer decides to act maliciously. Like, you need some kind of way to have that like backup option, right? I think that is a lot more important. Well, I mean, you know, the solution with decentralization is a way to get towards that security, right? But ultimately, like, what we want is a secure system that is fault tolerant. And so, you know, on the topic of decentralization, I think ultimately what we'll see is people converge around whatever solution people think is the most secure, right? And is the most secure. And so ideally those two things align, which is why sort of we're really focused on developing the ZKFPs right now, just because that's something that, you know, if you don't have that, even if you have a decentralized sequencer set, like, there's not, you know, it's still less secure than having a centralized sequencer set with actual working fraud proofs, right? And so I think ideally, like, we all want to march towards this you know, ultimate endpoint of everything being decentralized, but we also want to be practical around sort of taking steps towards that that end goal, right?
Got it. What are your just general predictions for the space over the next year? Not necessarily like financial, but like, what do you like see macro level? Are we in for like more pain and suffering?
No one wants to take this question. Too much reputational risk.
It's a Friday. It's a Friday, right?
I mean, I can say from our end and, you know, our perspective, talking to and working with a lot of folks in the space, like, I think over the next 5 years will be very, very exciting, I think, for
Uh-oh.
Oh, we're in the
Are we still
backstage.
here?
Everybody dropped for a second. I think that was Garrett, but we lost everybody for a second.
Yeah, we're back, right?
Yeah, we're back now. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just saying, like, I think from our perspective, right, like, talking to a lot of these institutional folks, and partners and investors, like, it's very clear to us that a lot is going to happen in the on-chain financial world in the next 5 years, and we're really trying to be at the center stage of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you think about your timeline as well too. I mean, like, when do you think you guys are going to be rolling out? Probably like next year sometime, like late Q3, Q4. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so we're hoping to get to testnet out in about like 1 or 2 months.
Oh, wow.
And then ideally for us, we'll have mainnet out within the next 12 months.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Pat, could you delve into the ecosystem side of things a bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I think like for our approach like to the ecosystem as a layer two, I think it's going to be quite different from like many other layer twos. So currently, as we can see right now, there are going to be like a lot of like layer twos, launching on Ethereum, and even just for the existing ones, there's kind of like a competition of, let's say, grants competitions to basically get the teams to migrate over. I think for us, we'll have a kind of a slightly different approach to that. So like we think like for the teams to launch on a roll up or to pick the ones like as their homes, they need not only like the financial support but also like ecosystem and also the team that can support their needs regarding the integrations and etc. So like for us, we position ourselves as the kind of like the layer two team that can really like support the need for a DeFi adapt team like to really deploy and grow like the dApps over in our ecosystem. So for us, like we all like, besides our financial support, we also offer like a lot of like technical support to all the various DeFi teams, and we help them to connect with like market makers and also like different dApp teams within our ecosystem or even like external to our ecosystem to really kind of like form that relationship-based ecosystem, like even before we launched testnet and mainnet. So I think that's quite different to like what other like layer twos is doing, and I think it's also kind of our non-technical or value propositions.
Doge legge de geisig.
Was that Gary?
That was me.
Oh yeah,
my pigeon Cantonese.
Oh, I cannot understand Cantonese, so I was like, oh, Garrett.
Oh no, you said you're in Hong Kong.
Yeah, but I can't understand Cantonese. It's really awkward over here.
Oh man.
Yeah, all about like Mandarin, I can do it. Like Cantonese, no.
Okay, well, 谢谢你.
没关系. Yeah, there's some Chinese words throwing around. Yeah, no, also at the same time, I think like a lot of DeFi teams, they really want to tap into the Asian areas. So also like of now, like the team is gonna have a bit like office in New York, but we're gonna be based like in Hong Kong, and we'll have a couple other people like over here in Asia. So I think on that front, we can also value a lot of like market insights over to our ecosystem projects, which is something like many of the existing layer twos and also future layer twos will not be able to support.
Yeah, I mean, just on the sound of it, the composability aspect is really important. I mean, I can think about projects that people are building in the space. I mean, you saw the hype that people built with GMX over the past year or two, and now just imagine what you can do with a hyper performant, perpetual exchange. I'm guessing you could even make like an option exchange or some sort of futures as well too. So the possibilities are boundless, and then be able to treat that into a composable, tokenizable contract. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I like, really like the thing that has us most excited about the space is just, the very nature of on-chain systems is just not only more accessibility for end users into the system itself, but more accessibility for developers, and thus by proxy more innovation at a faster pace, right? And that you need not only high performance, but you also need composability for that, and that's why we're super excited about building that on layer N.
So did you guys build the exchange already?
So one of our products is called Nord, which is an exchange-specific rollup. And what that is a rollup infrastructure that's specifically designed for the exchange use case, right? And so what we do is we'll partner with certain exchange teams to launch their exchanges on top of Nord, right? And Nord is able to support, like you said, anything from spot to perps to options to even any exotic funding formula that whatever the exchange team wants to offer as a product. And so think of it as essentially dedicated infrastructure for order book based exchanges. We can also tweak it for order book plus AMM hybrid exchanges, but it's really dedicated for that high throughput low latency use case.
Maybe you can, I was talking about this with Jack from Polygon yesterday, and I think somebody had come out and said, I think it was Jack came out and said that, oh, hey, we need a perpetual exchange where it's USD margined and that USD is taken and dropped into like a T-bills, right? And then the interest is then paid back in sort of like either the funding rate or some other type of product. That sort of thing will be composable and buildable with Layer N, right? The other thing that we, maybe you guys can answer this for me since you're building the exchange infrastructure, is that we really haven't seen any inverse margined perpetual or futures exchanges yet, or perpetual dexes yet. Is there a reason behind that? Like that everybody uses USD quotes rather than just like ETH or like ETH really?
Yeah. I mean, what I can say is that the teams that we're working with, like we're definitely chatting about like all kinds of new types of exchanges, new types of listings, assets. I think inverse perpetuals have been brought up as well. But the core truth there is that like we designed Nord to make sure that we can list all kinds of assets and that margin like all kinds of assets. Like so you can have like that like experience that people had on FTX, right, where you can deposit all kinds of collateral and trade whatever you want without like overthinking it, right? We'll see if like one of the teams will decide to go to the inverse perpetual route, but that's definitely something that's possible.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. I think we're really looking forward to seeing more documentation and code once it comes out. Like you guys said, the testnet, what, out in 1 month, 2 months?
Yeah,
like 1 to 2, yeah.
Oh wow, that's pretty cool. We'll be looking forward to that, and I think that's going to be a reason to have you guys back on in around the new year.
We'd
love to be.
Yeah. We'll wrap up there. Thank you so much, Pat and David and Dima, for coming on. Great to have you all.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, DA.
Thanks for having us.
And thanks everybody at home watching, taking the time out to be a part of the Pat fan club.
Yeah, amazing stuff on the chat today, Pat. You really brought next level energy. We had to keep up.
It's Friday. Hope everybody goes and touches some grass over the weekend. I know I will. And we will see you on Monday.
See you guys. Okay,
Goodbye,
thanks everyone.
Bye.